So when Jeremy suggested the theme of the conference, which was beekeeping as the poetry of agriculture, I made up this very fancy title, and I had about a year to write it, and I got completely lost. I bit off more than I could chew, and I got completely lost in doing this talk. So the only way I could handle it was to go back to personal experience and talk about my own attitude towards bees instead of viewing the general trends. So it's kind of from my point of view. So I'm using my place of work as a starting point, and I make a brief foray into like the history of folklore and myths and how bees have been romanticized, but then I pull it back hopefully to personal experience as well. This is the home apiary at the Abbey. And those hives, they all have names. We've got the two middle ones are called Sue, and the others are all Natasha's because we split them. So each of my colonies has a name rather than a number. So this is where I work. This is Buckfast Abbey. I'm really, really lucky. I've been working there for 9 years or so. It's the best job I've ever done. It's not like a job. Okay, so Buckfast Abbey is set in the beautiful Devon countryside. It's very rural, very hilly, very small hills and small field systems, hedgerows, trees, not many big crops, lots of sheep and cows and things. The Abbey is famous for tonic wine. I don't know if you've ever heard of tonic wine. It's the most disgusting drink. And the tonic is 35% caffeine. That's the tonic part. But also the Abbey is still the home of a community of Benedictine monks. And of course, one of the most famous monks at the Abbey was Brother Adam. I never met Brother Adam. He died long before I began to work at the Abbey, but I knew of him and I'd read his books. He became famous really because he bred the Buckfast bee. And so basically he developed a crossbred honeybee subspecies, which he believed was the answer for commercial beekeepers. And since I work at the Abbey and I'm in the bee department, I'm interested in this man. The reason why I have my job, because without Brother Adam, I wouldn't have my job. There wouldn't be the bees at Buckfast Abbey without that history. And so I'm interested in his relationship with bees. So he's quite a romantic figure, and although many entomologists and researchers and people that work with bees are famous to other entomologists and beekeepers, no one has quite captured the imagination as much as Brother Adam, even just to the general public. You know, they all know Brother Adam, although they call him Father Adam, but they know that he was linked with the bees. And there is a potent mix of the mystique of being a monk and the mystique of the honeybee, which is a very potent mix. And so I've been around talking to all the monks and asking what was he like, Brother Adam. I've been talking to loads of people. So at the Abbey now, there's only around 12 monks, and it's an aging population. You know, they're all getting on and they're not getting replaced. So most of the monks knew Brother Adam. And so I went round and I asked them all, what was he like really? Well, I can't tell you what Brother Stephen said, because monks aren't supposed to swear. Father Christopher said, oh, he never talked to any of us. You know, he had his Ovaltine at 8 o'clock and that was it, he went to bed. And so Father Dominic said that he used to make him cry, because Dominic had to be smoker boy for him and he never could do it right. So I'm getting the picture of a very centered man, someone who's very focused on the bees and quite didn't suffer fools gladly, put it that way. But then I ask other people, visitors, and they say he was charming. So what we've got is a very complex man. So I thought I'd go back to understand Adam, really. I'd go back to the start of the Abbey and the history of the abbey and see how he fitted into all that. So the original it was originally a Cistercian abbey founded in the medieval times in 1018. It was destroyed during the dissolution of the monasteries by Thomas Cromwell, but from about 1882, a group of Benedictine monks from France, lots from Germany, and one from Scotland moved into the remains of the abbey and started to rebuild it by hand. So I'm literally saying by hand. And as well as rebuilding the abbey, they tried to build up the community and to get young monks in and to build up the people that lived in the abbey. And it was quite common in those days for boys from either poorer families or very religious families to kind of give their children to the abbey so that they would either be educated or they would later become a monk. And Adam was one of those. So Adam arrived from Germany in 1910, and he was only 11 years old. And he became what we call an alumnate. And all these, I'll show you Adam. He's that one there, haven't got a pointer. And he came by himself from Germany, and it was quite a strict life for them. They did lessons in the morning, and they had to wear the black frocks and everything. And they were also taught skills, like stonemasonry and working on the farm and cooking. And so they were apprentices, if you like, but they weren't allowed to talk to each other very much. They weren't allowed to speak their own language. He wasn't allowed to speak German. There was very little communication. And so it must have been a very lonely time for him, I think. It was quite strict. And these alumnates, as they grew older, when they got to a certain age, they could choose to become a lay monk or a choir monk. And the choir monks were the ones that lived in the monastery and did all the praying, got up at 5 and prayed, and and had the religious life. The lay monks were more or less servants, and they didn't have to do all the praying. I think they had to go to Mass once in the morning, and that was it. But Adam chose to stay a lay monk. And they didn't live in the monastery. They lived in a separate building. They were like a separate community, if you like. And I found these old photographs in the archives. They let me go into the archives. And these were all glass slides, these pictures. They were on glass slides. So it was really interesting to go through and see. It was a completely different life then. It was, that old thing of being self-sufficient. They had the farm, they had animals, they had orchards, they had bees, and they were building the abbey. So and now it's a tourist place. They earn their money from tourism. And Adam wasn't considered strong enough to work on the rebuilding of the abbey, so he was put to work with Brother Columban and looked after the abbey bees. And in those days, the abbey had around 45 colonies in 2 apiaries. So this is one of the apiaries, which was an orchard. And this is the other one, which is near where the monk cemetery is now. I don't know if you know, but in England, around the turn of the century, around between 1904 to 1920, there was a devastating disease amongst bees, and it was dubbed the Isle of Wight disease. Have you heard of that? Well, nobody really knew what it was, and everything was blamed. It started in the Isle of Wight, and then it quickly spread to the mainland, and it just kind of devastated the bees in England. They were nearly wiped out. And some people say that the indigenous British black bee, Apis mellifera, was wiped out. But whether that's true or not is contentious. Anyway, they blamed everything: nosema, the weather, poisonous plants, chemical sprays, and even the movable frame hive was blamed because they'd only just kind of swapped over from skep hives. And then by 1912, scientists discovered 2 things. Nosema is one thing, but also they discovered acarine, or tracheal mite. And everyone said, well, that's it then. That's what it is. Like, we always want a simple solution. It's like colony collapse disorder. You just want to pin it on something, blame something, and then make it better. And that's what they did then. Adam was convinced that acarine was the whole cause of all the bee deaths in the country. Nowadays, I've read lots of research that says that acarine was probably not the main cause of the Isle of Wight disease, and the most likely explanation is that the losses were caused by a combination of factors, including chronic bee paralysis virus, which was unknown at the time, poor weather, limiting foraging, overstocking, keeping too many bees for a smaller amount of forage, and also remember the war was happening at that time, and a lot of beekeepers would have gone off to war. So, I think it's more likely it was a whole load of things, and any bees that died, it was attributed to the Isle of Wight disease. This is chronic bee paralysis, by the way. So the Abbey lost bees as well. Out of their 45 colonies, they were left with 16 colonies, and those colonies which survived were from Italian or Carniolan origins, because bees had been imported quite a lot. And so, obviously, they were mating with the local black drones. And Adam noticed that the ones that survived were the hybrids, the ones, that were part black, part Italian, part black, or part Carniolan. And so they decided to breed from those, split those, and they also brought in Italian queens. And they built their stocks up to 100 again. And that summer was a good summer, and they had a good honey crop. By about 1918, Brother Columban was getting older, and he wasn't really into the commercial side of beekeeping, so he retired, and Adam took over as head of the bee department, and they started selling nuclei and Italian crossbred queens. And Adam believed, and this is a key point, Adam believed that bees were his vocation, and he felt that he'd been chosen by God for the work. He endeavoured to serve God and his community through working with the bees. And that's certainly the feedback I get from the monks, that he was totally focused on the bees. I read a book by Leslie Bill, who's an optician, actually, in Newton Abbot, where I live. So I met her and read her book. And she wrote a biography of Adam, and she actually went off to Africa with him and was a close friend of his. And she says at that time, Adam took the bee department in 3 different directions. One was the management of the bees and the apiaries. He also reorganised and upgraded the extraction and the bottling plants. And this is the old heather press here and the spinning machine. And also he started to breed the honeybee, and that's what made him famous, the breeding of the honeybee. So Adam was inspired not only by Mendel's work on genetic inheritance, but also by the theoretical writings of a guy called Professor Ludwig Armbruster. And he wrote a theoretical book about bee breeding. And those were Adam's main inspirations. Strangely, I was thinking surely there were other people that were doing this, around this time. And I discovered in a British bee journal dated at 1905, this advert, which was for British Golden Queens, which was an Italian black bee cross. He followed Mendel's principles, and he had an isolation site. So this guy was doing it 20 years before Adam, and there were other people as well, but they're not famous. In 1925, Adam started Sherborton, which is up on Dartmoor. It was his isolation mating site. So he was wanting to control the drones which his virgins mated with. And the only way you can do that is by having no other bees nearby and just putting your drones there. And this idea also had been used by the Swiss as early as 1898 by people that were trying to keep the Swiss bee pure. And what Adam did was he took 4 drone colonies up there. You can see them just here. Because the little mating nukes, they never got big enough to produce drones. They're small, and they never got to the population where they would have made drones. So he took these drone colonies up there, and they were usually sister colonies. So all those drones up there with those virgins would have been related. And he was doing that in order to fix characteristics. So it's all very well doing a hybrid, but you have to fix the characteristics. And so close the gene pool down, if you like. This is Dartmoor. This is what Dartmoor looks like. It's not nice for bees. It's very beautiful, but there aren't many flowers. There are no trees. It's granite. If you don't feed the bees every 4 weeks up there, they die. And that's the reason why he chose it as an isolation site. But on the other hand, matings are not good there either, because you don't, it's cooler up there, windier. The queens don't get to go out very long for mating, so it's a difficult place. So the original Buckfast crossbred bee was made before 1920 from a dark leather-coloured Italian bee, Apis mellifera liguria, which comes from the Alps, and the British black bee, which is Apis mellifera mellifera. That was the original cross. And after Sherborton had been established as a mating site, there was no stopping Adam. He really got the bug for breeding bees then. So originally his idea was to breed a bee that was resistant to acarine and therefore not, to beat the Isle of Wight disease. But then he really got into making a really good commercial bee. And I used to think that the Buckfast bee was just a Labradoodle, like two crosses. But Labradoodles come out different each time. And what Adam did was he tried to fix the characteristics. So really, the Buckfast bee was more like a spaniel or a collie dog. It was fixed so that they had specific characteristics which would be constant. But that's only if you breed them with Buckfast bees. Because if you buy one and then she has if you have to split her, the next generation will be just a mongrel again. So it's not constant. So what started out as a response to a distressing problem for Adam became something of an obsession, and he devoted his life to the development of a super bee. And he was quite hard line about it. And he wrote 3 books. And between 1948 and 1987, Brother Adam travelled the world assessing different purebred stock and bringing them back, and then trying them out with his basic Buckfast cross. And if they didn't work out, he abandoned that. And then, he spent his life fiddling around with the genetics to kind of get this perfect bee, and his wish list, if you like, was quite ambitious. He wanted a gentle bee. He wanted to be have a long tongue and go out in all weathers. He wanted her to be thrifty. He wanted her to make loads of honey. Everything, you could think of, wish for the bees. That's what Adam wanted. And he was a persistent and methodical worker. This is one of the things he said. Our aim is a progressive, positive, and permanent improvement to the honeybee to correspond to the demands of the modern beekeeping. But I think, is there such a thing as the perfect bee? Can we breed it, or is it already there? Adam consistently said that there was no such thing that existed in nature. The perfect bee didn't already exist. He thought he could make it. He thought he could improve on nature. And he did make a good commercial bee. But for me, she's not my kind of bee. For me, she is too, I'm going to say, eggy. She lays lots of eggs. She makes a very big brood nest. And I prefer a more modest, self-sufficient bee. I want a bee that's going to need less input from me and to have a smaller, self-contained brood unit and probably a little bit less honey. So people come to the Abbey as a kind of homage to Brother Adam. We particularly get them from Denmark, from Holland, from Luxembourg, all those, Germany, where he's like a saint. And they all come, and sometimes they come with their little buckfast bee that they bred, and it's in their pocket, and they want me to have it and try it. And I can honestly say none of them have been any better than my Devon mongrels. The other thing, and I'll go into this more later, Adam was trying to breed a bee which was resistant to disease and to be a good commercial bee. But I think if you start being picky about characteristics, you're going to lose other important characteristics. And one of the things that no one knows about Buckfast Abbey is they had really bad problems with AFB. And Adam never owned up to that. In fact, he was treating for AFB illegally with terramycin, which is not legal in our country to use. And when one of the monks blew the whistle on him, AFB popped up everywhere, and they had hundreds of hives burned. And that's, in England, that's what happens. If you have AFB, it's destruction. They don't do shook swarm, it's destruction. And I feel that if you're narrowing the gene pool, then you're going to get side effects of that bee being less fit, or the colony being less fit. And that they did have terrible AFB problems. So it comes to the question now, I get emails every week, can I buy a Buckfast queen? And I have to say, we don't do that anymore. And they say, well, how come you don't breed the Buckfast bee? So there's a couple of things that come to my mind immediately. I like our bees. I think our bees are fabulous. I like the diversity of characters. I enjoy the variation in behaviour. And I don't mind that they're not all the same. I like having this varied family of girls. And now we're looking at, we've around 30 colonies now, and they're all different. I do feel very uncomfortable about using an isolation site. I don't feel it's good to restrict the drones for the long-term fitness of the colony, basically. And I don't believe there is any such thing as a perfect bee. I think there's been a cost to our refinement of Apis mellifera. So one of my heroes is Keith Delaplane, and I read his columns in the American Bee Journal, and I've listened to him speak several times. And basically what he says is the more unrelated drones that the queen mates with, there'll be more diversity within the colony, there will be more subfamilies, more sets of super sisters. These colonies will have a greater range of behaviours and response strategies, and it's like having an incredibly sophisticated tool set compared to a hammer and some rusty nails. So I think queens that have mated with lots of unrelated drones are much healthier than ones that have been selected for narrow characteristics. A well-mated queen, one that's mated with lots of unrelated drones, will give off more pheromones, and therefore she'll be better looked after by her workers. There's also some research by Mattila, and I think you've got her coming to speak to you, Heather Mattila, where she says that well-mated queens giving off more pheromones, and we know that the pheromones of the queen suppress the ovaries of the workers in conjunction with brood pheromone, which means that always there are workers in the colony which are laying, whether there's a queen there or not. But if the queen is badly mated, then you've got more of those workers trolling around laying eggs. And then the other bees have to go and police those bees. And so the colony cohesion is not so good anymore. You've got bees that are not doing their jobs because they're laying eggs. You've got other bees that are having to stop these bees, and the whole thing just doesn't work as well. And even things like their gut bacteria are not as good. You know, I think it's so important for the queen to mate with as many drones as she can manage. That's what I say to people. I say, when people say, why don't you breed the Buckfast bee anymore? I say, our virgins go off and mate with as many drones as she can manage. And that's, you know, I don't think 4 colonies in an isolation site is enough. So to my mind, the queens which mated with drones which are related, they may not show inbreeding problems immediately, but gradually over time that gene pool is going to be getting smaller, and those boys, they're all cousins and brothers. That can't be right. I also think natural evolution takes place over an enormous period of time, and all the imbalances which happen on the way are taken care of and adjusted with the extravagance of time. And if we fast track evolution by artificial selection, and I don't mean by gentle selection, we all do gentle selection, we all breed from our nice queens, but if you really heavily select, then the colony can become lopsided in her skills and less disease resistant. And some honeybee behaviours are carried out by many bees, all performing simple tasks which synchronise with other bees, all doing simple tasks, resulting in very complex attainments. And we often view those attainments as a single heritable trait, for example, hygienic behaviour. So we all think that's just a trait that could be passed on to the next generation. I think hygienic behaviour is a recessive gene, and it takes about 7 different genes to configure to get that behaviour. It's not as simple as one gene passing on to the next generation. So now at the Abbey, we promote what I call, it's not natural beekeeping, it's gentle beekeeping. The bee department has changed. I'll just read you a little bit from our leaflet. By learning about bees, we can engage with them, respond more appropriately to their needs, and try to help with any problems which they encounter. This could be anything from parasite control to starvation. We aim to work alongside each colony during every season to remain as flexible and responsive to the environment as they do. This involves respectful and mindful management of the bees, as well as gentle handling, which takes into account their natural behaviour and instincts. Each colony has her own character, her own name, and is important. So Adam used these big modified dating colonies and hives, and they were hell to work with. For me, much too heavy. And if you had a colony which wasn't very strong, she never even got out the brood box. She never made honey. And so we changed to Langstroth, which is unusual in England. Most people are on nationals, so we changed to Langstroth, which I think is a very nice hive. They all have Vura mesh floors. We don't use queen excluders. We probably take less honey because we're not under pressure anymore, thank goodness, to sell in the shops. All the honey goes to the monks, mostly Brother Nicholas. We don't use isolation sites anymore, but we do rear queens. I run a queen rearing course, and we do queen rearing as part of our swarm management as well. Occasionally, we'll buy in a queen just to keep the gene pool refreshed, or we do a bit of swapsying. So I have a very nice line going at home at the moment in my garden. She's lovely, she's gentle. When she's going to split, I will take the split into work, and probably vice versa, take some from work home. So we try and keep the gene pool stirred up. We keep less colonies in a particular space. This is the home apiary again. Brother Adam had 45 colonies in the home apiary. We now have 6. And Adam's formal gardens, we're trying to develop a forest garden there. So it's a kind of less work maintenance thing. You've got a tree layer, a shrub layer, and a ground layer, and it's all plants which are good for the bees. And we've got around 30 colonies. We've got the home apiary, I've got a teaching apiary, we've got the community apiary, a little secret apiary that the monks don't know about, and 2 observation hives. This is Ellie, this is in my bee barn, and we keep her going all year round. She'll go through the winter fine. I wrap her up in a quilt when she's in the winter, but she's doing fine. She's still got brood at the moment. She's still got a little patch of brood, and there's 6 frames in there. There's 3 sets of 2 on Langstroth Deeps. And in the spring, she'll swarm. and I'm going to let her. We let her swarm this spring, and very nicely she did it while we were there, so we could just box her up and carry her on. But she is a lovely, lovely bee, and every morning I go in and sniff through the vents because she smells gorgeous. And the queen comes out regularly and lays in front of us, and it's amazing to just spend time watching them. They do loads of grooming. It's amazing. They do this wobble dance, and then the other bees leap upon them and do all the bits they can't reach, like the petiole, and they hold the wings out like that, and they do under the wings. And we were formerly in 2 porta cabins, which was a bit hellish. It was like an icebox in winter, and in summer you couldn't breathe for the heat. And now we're in this gorgeous barn, which the monks built for us, and it's like an open space, very flexible space, and we have like a office, living room area, we have a classroom area, we have a workshopy area, and it's amazing, and it's heated. We've got radiators. I take my washing in the winter to dry. I'm not a natural beekeeper, but I do like the bees to have the opportunity to make their own comb at times. So I tried different ways, not all their own comb, just in some frames, and I tried lots of ways of letting them do this. And then this idea came from a magazine, so I can't claim that I invented this, but it's great. It's a top bar, and then a piece of ply with a hole cut in it, and you just put that in, say, a frame away from the brood nest, so not next to the brood nest, the one next to that. And then the bees do that. It's amazing. They just fill it in with their own comb, and they make whatever cell size they want. And they make drone if they need drone, they put honey if they need honey, or they make worker bees. And when that comb's old and black, you can just take it away and they'll build it again. It's lovely. We keep good records. They're not autistic records, they're kind of meaningful records, so you don't have to fill in all of the things all of the time. But we encourage, and I would say to anyone in the community apiary, you don't look at a hive unless you've seen what went before, because all the information you see needs to fit into a context. You need to know what happened before you can make a judgment on what's happening. This is my community apiary. We have some hives and the monks own loads of land. They're very rich. They own loads of land, and this is the woods, and this is lovely. It's we have around 6 colonies there, and then a couple of the community apiary members have their own bees there. And it's for people who want to do bees, but they can't do it in their garden. Veronica, she can't keep bees in her garden because her husband doesn't want bees in the garden. So she has her girls with us, which is nice. It's like a bee allotment. And very informal. And then we have tea and go back and do bee chat and stuff like that. And we try and be, if anyone's done the beginner's course, they can be part of the community apiary, and then they can get more experience and support from other people. So my aim is to get people to engage with their bees and try to see the world through the eyes of not just an individual bee, but through the collective intelligence of a superorganism, and to enjoy their bees. That's key, to enjoy their bees. And so it's so easy to anthropomorphize bees. We all do it. I mean, I give my colonies names, but they do share 60% of our genome, but we do them a disservice by interpreting all their actions and behaviors by using our own reference points. So I hear people say things like, the bees want to swarm, or the worst thing I hear is the bees are confused. I hate that one. It's us who are confused. The bees are just responding to what's ever happening to them. You have to admit they are beautiful, though, and it's really difficult not to respond emotionally when they interact with us. When I look at my bees and they're good as gold and they don't seem to mind me being there, I get this heart swell. It hurts because it's so, I went recently to the South Devon Bee Convention, and there was a natural beekeeper, and he was giving a lecture about natural beekeeping, and he said he kept 20 hives, he didn't like honey, and he didn't keep the bees for that reason. He said he was just fascinated by bees. And I said, well, why don't you keep ants? And he couldn't answer that one. So why are bees the celebrities of the insect world? And I think the answer is honey, but we have a tradition of beekeeping. That's the thing. People haven't traditionally kept ants, but we have a tradition of beekeeping. And all the Hymenoptera family are fascinating. You know, ants have the most sophisticated eusocial systems. And wasps are seen as villains, but they are useful insects and they make beautiful nests. And yet we either label insects as good or bad, depending on our perceptions of them. And really, it does come down to honey. I mean, the beginning of our relationship with bees must come down to honey. But one of my other heroes is Mark Winston, and he's written Honeybee Biology, but he's written also 2 books of essays about beekeeping, which are amazing to read. And I love it when scientists reveal this kind of emotional side as well. And you can see that they're a bit, you know, they move away from their science a little bit. So Winston says, you know, bees are kept all over the world. Wherever there's flowers, there's bees. And bees occupy this kind of strange space. They're domesticated, but they're not domesticated. They're contained, but they're still wild. And if they escape, if they swarm, they can still survive. Whereas, you know, if you have a cow that needs milking, she escapes, she's not going to survive for very long. So they do occupy this very strange space, you know, and my friend Martin says that the only reason why they aren't considered fully domesticated is that they can sting. And in a strange way, stinging is part of their allure, you know. The beekeeper is regarded by some as a kind of animal whisperer or a brave soul, or the bees, you know, if you're a beekeeper, they all say, oh, do you get stung? You know, and it kind of elevates you to this strange position. But also the bees' ability to sting, we need to respect them. We need to treat them either gently or wear protective clothing. And this is Winston again. Honeybees are different. They bridge the gap between human and nature, between feral and managed, and they remind us of our natural roots. And no matter what kind of beekeeper you are, whether you're a hard-nosed honeyman or whether you're a natural beekeeper that don't keep bees for honey, everyone seems to have this common kind of sense of relaxation or communication with their bees. You can learn things from your bees. They're therapeutic in lots of ways. They're calming and they can be meditative. Not all the time, sometimes. And they can be an escape. You know, sometimes when I look at my bees, I go into this different world, you know, and everything else, all the rubbish that's happening in my own world, melts away and I'm in there with the bees. You know, and it's just a major distraction. This is Winston again. A tacit understanding exists between the beekeeper and colony. If you're calm around honeybees, they will be calm as well. And it creates a dynamic which feels to the beekeeper like a relationship. This is my colleague, Segundo. This is a little swarm that surprised us. Now, the relationship I have with my bees isn't the same as the relationship I have with my dog. This is Deefa. My bees won't even give me cupboard love. They don't have oxytocin. They don't depend on me in any kind of emotional sense. But I've invested a huge amount of feeling into their care and well-being. It's a one-sided relationship. I do this thing with a talk where it's called How to Love Your Bees. And I say at the end, they'll never love you back. You know, it's a one-sided relationship. But I find that freeing. I find that wonderful, that I don't have the responsibility of you know, trying to fulfill their emotional needs as well. It would be terrible. However, as beekeepers, we're a diverse crowd of individuals. No matter how we choose to do it, we share a tradition and a history which is either a professional one or a hobby one. You know, if I wanted to keep ants, where would I go? How would I get them? Where would I keep them? With bees, it's easy. And the range of hives is incredible, from plastic and polystyrene to, you've got the natural beekeepers, willow and wood and warray hives, and the type of beehive that you choose kind of denotes the kind of beekeeper that you are. But really, and there's lots of lively discussion about what is the best hive to keep bees in. Well, to be honest, they don't care. The bees don't care. Give them a cavity and a defendable entrance, and they'll make comb. And if, once they've made comb, they'll fill it with honey, and then the queen will lay eggs, and they don't care what kind of cavity they're in. They're opportunists. And if you give them extra space, they will be compelled to make honey, because we manipulate their hoarding instinct. So there are pictures of humans stealing honey from bees dating back to 13,000 BC. And our relationship with honeybees has always been linked with their ability to make honey. And whether you keep bees, whether you hunt for honey, as they still do in parts of Asia, or whether you keep bees and you nurture them, at the end of the day, you rob them. We're both robbing the bees. Now, we as a bee department at Buckfast have the privilege of keeping bees without them having to pay for their keep. Nowadays, I don't have to sell honey in the shops. The honey just goes to the monks. I have the luxury of keeping these bees without having to rob them of all their honey, and to pay. Tonic wine pays my wages. I don't have to worry about that. And nowadays we do. We have the luxury of choosing to keep bees without actually needing the honey. And I know people do keep bees and they need to make a profit and they make their living by it. But as a people, we don't really need honey anymore in the way that they used to. It's not our only sweetener. Our supermarkets are stuffed to the gunnels with sweet products, from sugar-saturated fizzy drinks. Even tomato sauce has got sugar in, and you can buy just about any honey in the supermarket. So why do we feel compelled to keep our own bees? This is my friend Neil, who's got 30 colonies on his allotment. Do you have allotments here? They're like in England, there are plots of land and they're divided up into strips, and you can hire a strip and grow your own vegetables. And anyway, Neil has 30 colonies on his vegetable plot. And he's a great guy. But honey is better when it comes from your own bees. It's like growing your own veg or cooking your own food from scratch. It's different, it's unique. But more than that, we are beekeepers. We are mysterious and magical. We are practical and skillful. We're knowledgeable, and we're full of wisdom and inherited folklore. We are gentle and brave and fearless and protectors of the environment, and we are the saviors of the planet. So during the relatively short time of our existence on Earth, we have valued the honeybee and developed a relationship with her, both economically but spiritually. And honeybees have always been surrounded by myths, legends, folklore. Since man's first encounters with them thousands of years ago, they've been part of magical rituals and religion. So they were the tears of Ra. If you go into any civilizational culture, you'll find the honeybee there. They were the tears of Ra. This is St. Ambrose, and apparently a swarm of bees were supposed to have alighted on his lip when he was a baby in the cradle, and therefore he had the gift of eloquence and a honeyed tongue. And I looked up the bee in an encyclopedia of symbols, and all these are virtues which were attributed to bees. All good things, all the things that you would think: diligence, courage, prudence, posterity, harmonious living. It's all there. You can see how it all fits. And even honey has been not just a sweet food, but it's a sacred food. It's a food of the gods. But strangely, where the honeybee is very virtuous and virginal, honey is also an aphrodisiac and can impart virility and fertility. And the hive, or the bee colony, has always been used consistently to confirm and illustrate moral values and to represent countless idealistic models of society. And in art, it's been, this is one of my favourite, this is Albert Dürer, and it's called Cupid and the Honeybee. And I love this. He's Cupid has been stealing honey and he's getting stung, and I can't remember what her name is, but she says, well, it's your own fault. But it's, you know, the bee has consistently been used in art and poetry. These books are from around the turn of the century to the 1940s, and just look at the titles of these books. They're not fiction, they're about the life of the honeybee or the biology of the honeybee, the lore of the honeybee, the romance of the hive, the golden throng, the spell of the honeybee. They're romantic. And even Carl von Frisch's book about bee communication is called The Dancing Bees. You know, they have this very romantic connotations. And has anyone ever read Maeterlinck's The Life of the Bee? This was written on the turn of the century. I'm just going to read you a very short bit. This is supposed to be about the life of the bee. So this is the virgin's mating flight. She starts her flight backwards, returns twice or thrice to the alighting board, and then, having definitely fixed in her mind the exact situation and aspect of the kingdom she has never yet seen from without, she departs like an arrow to the zenith of the blue. She soars to a height, a luminous zone that other bees attain at no period of their life. Far away, caressing their idleness in the midst of the flowers, the males have beheld the apparition, have breathed the magnetic perfume that spreads from group to group till every apiary is near its instinct. Immediately crowds collect and follow her into the sea of gladness, whose limpid boundaries ever recede. Can you imagine that being written about 2 pigs? Or 2 dogs? We have always desired honey, and why not? It's the most amazing, delicious, magical food, and it's made for bees, but it's this energy-rich, storable food. It's perfectly packaged, it's easily accessible. The craftsmanship of the comb is beautiful, it's efficient, the way they model the wax, it's thrifty, and the communication and shared labour that the bees use to make this. What a product. It's just amazing. And it's made by insects. And it's made from flowers. It gets better and better. And not only that, the flowers aren't even ours. Our bees go on everyone else's flowers. But what do the bees have to say? Communication is something the bees do par excellence. The pheromones, the dancing, the buzzing, the piping, the shaking, the food sharing, the shoving and the stroking all serve to share information which is circulated, processed and acted upon. Simple actions combine to create complicated and impressive outcomes. And despite our anthropomorphism, there are no egos to sully the purity of the information and the intelligence which is gathered, shared, and played out. The language which bees use is sophisticated and labile. The colony thinks in a different way from us. They don't weigh up the pros and the cons of the situation. They don't angst about what might be or what might be. They just respond to thresholds or balances being tipped. This is just an example. This is a list of the chemicals which is in the Queen's Dufour's gland. And these chemicals are not stable. They're changing and shifting all of the time. And the Queen is giving out this cocktail of chemicals from all of these glands all over her body. And the communication is achieved by these pheromones, these chemical messages, depends completely on the context. The receptiveness, not all bees are going to get the same message. It depends on her physiological condition, her age, her character, her genetic inheritance. It depends on her nutritional state, the state of the rest of the colony, their environment, the conditions inside and outside the hive. The chemicals will have different impacts on different bees depending on a whole load of other things. And the communication which is exchanged between the queen and her young attendants is an intricate interchange of tactile and aromatic messages which can affect not only their behaviours but their brain function and their physiology. The queen uses pheromones to affect the dopamine levels in the workers to keep them younger so that they look after her for longer. It's incredible. So for me, the authentic poetry of the hive is the superorganism, its secret language. And that's like poetry, because you know when you first hear poetry and you don't understand what it means, and you think, well, what's going on here? I don't understand this. And then someone tells you or explains, a good teacher, and it starts to make sense. We just get a glimpse of what's happening in the beehive. We understand a little bit, but there's so much we don't understand. And to me, that's much more amazing than all of the myths, all of the legends, all of the fanciful stories and the romantic notions and pretty words. It's her flexibility and her plasticity. And sometimes that's not pretty. This is the drones, the eviction of the drones. And that's hard, but that's nature, and it's life and it happens. So, going back to Brother Adam, we had a completely different outlook on bees. His mission was about control and trying to achieve something definite. He wanted improvement, but I just prefer watching and working with whatever is. But I reckon we would have got on. I reckon we would have plenty of talk about, because we both love bees. And I think for Adam, bees were a major distraction. They were his raison d'etre, they were his life, and he put everything into bees. And maybe I haven't got that commitment, maybe I'm somewhere else, but I think, both of us would have had common ground. And for me also, bees can be a major distraction, as they are for many of us. But I think there's a strong message emanating from the hive for me as a beekeeper and a lover of bees, and that is, right from the start of our relationship with them, we've been altering her character, and her attributes have been refined to make her easier to live with and more useful and more productive for us. And I think it's time for us to be considering more seriously and with more commitment how to make it easier for bees to live with us. Instead of us changing the bee, maybe we should be altering our world back a bit to make bees' lives less stressful for them. And we may not be able to achieve this all of the time, but we could do more of this. There are compromises that we can make. Instead of changing everything, we could just kind of start adding things back into the mix that we've taken away, and less of this, inside and outside the hive. Because I think for bees, one of the messages I get from the hive is diversity is important. They need diversity of food, they need diversity of habitat, they need diverse gene pool, and they're showing us that diversity is important for all of us, not just bees. And we put enormous pressure on them to pollinate our crops. And really, maybe we should be making our crops more varied so that more pollinators can share the burden with honeybees. So this is the end of the slideshow. I was going to read a bit of ramble, but I don't think I will. Yeah? I edited it a little bit. So when I got really stuck on this talk, I went down to the bottom of the garden where I have 2 colonies. I live in a small terraced house in a town with a small garden with neighbours on each side. My 2 hives there are called Etta and Urethra. And so I sat a foot or 2 away from them, and I just wrote down on paper a load of rambling, and I'll just read it to you. So I'm sat at a foot or so from my 2 garden hives, Etta and Urethra. It's sunny and there is a constant stream of bees humming in and out of the wooden boxes, filled with combs, bursting with honey, pollen, eggs and larvae, and emerging brood. My queens are wandering around the intimate, fragrant surfaces, laying eggs, resting, and they're being stroked, fed, and serviced. The bees ignore me. They are completely focused on their world, thousands of independent individuals, one entity. Their lives are an infinite number of moments which all add up to a future and a continuity. We credit them with values which we can recognize and admire. They are industrious and altruistic. They are alchemists and transform the sweet secretions from flowers into the thick golden honey. They can sting or seem docile and sweet-tempered. I'm a city girl, and I grew up among concrete and traffic fumes. Nature has been sidelined and contained, but never completely suppressed. Dandelions can push up through tarmac, and buddleias grow out from brick chimney pots. Rats, foxes, squirrels, snails, wasps, blue tits and blue bottles are all part of our urban and rural ecology. We tend to attribute each animal, plant and insect with a label of their worth or their perceived nuisance. Bees are considered useful to us, not just for honey, wax, propolis, but because they pollinate flowers and facilitate food. They become symbolic of the health of our planet. Everyone wants to save the bees. Agriculture and farming are less often a bucolic, romantic reality. The picture book thatched cottages never really were the chic living spaces they've become today. Country folk died young from exhaustion and broken bodies. Robotic milking machines are replacing small dairy farms with doe-eyed Jersey cows named Daisy and Buttercup. The world needs food, efficiency, cost-effective, mass-produced. Bees are needed to pollinate monocultures where no natural pollinators can survive. How can honeybees be the poetry of agriculture? How long can they be the poetry of agriculture?